It's a purpose that is willing to be changed by the people we encounter. A purpose that entails a kind of openness to transformation or revelation, as in the story of Jesus. An openness to creating and maintaining a place where folks can reveal themselves for who they are, where we can reveal ourselves for who we are, where it's safe and expected, that we drop our guards, that we learn to be with one another in peace and kindness and love and justice. That idea stemmed from a little book I've been reading called To Know as We Are Known. It's been written by Parker Palmer, an educational guru and a Quaker. His project is to reimagine education as a spiritual journey. And as part of my purpose here, as a minister, that's what I've been called to join you in doing, to reimagine how we learn together. Palmer suggests that education is really about what he calls creating a space where obedience to truth is practiced. Creating a space where obedience to truth is practiced. Now, it's a thin book, and there's a lot more in it, but it's really just summed up in that. The truth that he's talking about our obedience to is a shared truth, a truth we discover together, not a truth that's imposed from outside. It's a truth that arises in community, a truth that arises in dialogue, in open and honest and safe conversation, in what he calls a community of troth, a community of faithfulness and loyalty, where promises are made and kept. Creating a space where we practice obedience to truth. What would that look like? Well, one version of that might be found in the connections groups that are forming here at this church right now. These small group ministries have been aptly summed up by Matt Thomas, one of their lead trainers, as reverential relational groups. These are places where promises, covenants are made in these groups, where a culture of safety and an expectation that each of us will reveal ourselves to one another is formed. And where that environment draws us into reverential relationships and then service in light of that community, in light of those truths and that troth. When was the last time you were engaged with another person in what you would call a reverential relationship? I'm not talking about worshiping someone. I'm not talking about adoration. I'm talking about a relationship in which you're tender and intentional and honest and caring, in which the commitment that you share is of primary importance to keep coming back to that relationship. It's not about the usefulness that you have to each other. It's about the quality of how you are together. That is what the connections groups here at Fountain Street Church are about, trying to create one environment, one container where it is safe to practice obedience to the truth that is found there in that space among those people. I imagine that in these communities, folks will learn to practice that obedience, that they will lose their own selves and rediscover new selves. And I imagine that's happening in other places here in this church as well, that in some of the guilds that have been here for years and years, in the choir that as a community unto itself, that there are many places that happens here, and probably places that happens in your life outside of this place. But what I'd like to challenge you to do is to pay closer attention to that, to be more intentional about it. And if you've fallen into a laxness about how that practice happens, to revitalize it, to pay more attention to how you are. Because as we all know in relationships, it's easy to just slide by, to not be our best selves, to talk in shorthand, to give the short end of the stick to the people we see most often. The prophetic poet Marge Piercy encouraged us in her poem Counsels, which is also in our hymnal. She says, "We must sit down and reason together." Perhaps we could sit in the dark. In the dark, we could utter our feelings. In the dark, we could propose and describe and suggest. In the dark, we could not see who speaks, and only the words would say what they say. No one would speak more than twice, and no one would speak less than once. Thus, saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other in the dark, perhaps we could begin to listen. The women must learn to dare to speak, and the men must learn to bother to listen. The women must learn to say, "I think this is so," and the men must learn to stop dancing solos on the ceiling. After each speaks, she or he will say a ritual phrase. "It is not I who speaks, but the wind. Wind blows through me. Long after me is the wind." This is the kind of loitering I'm talking about, the kind of being found that we're after here. It's about this, about sitting down together, about making and taking time, being attentive to how we are, because once we're found, it doesn't end. It's not just about looking for the laughter and seeing it there, because there's service to be done once we're found. There's the finding of others. There's the liberation of the world. We've perhaps experienced it even though we've participated in the oppression of others. And so it's our task then to continue that liberation. Because once we're found, it's not all just a sweet, happy ending. There's bickering and disappointment. But if we could begin to listen, as Piercy says, if some of us would dare to speak and others of us would be quiet and stop dancing solos, and if we could learn to listen to the truth that speaks through us, so that when folks start to fall down and worship, we can say, "Hey, it's just me." But look at the truth we discover together. Can this be a place where that kind of community happens? Can we practice learning obedience to truth? Can we cultivate a culture of productive loitering? Can we make spaces to listen and speak? I know this is a place for me to practice those things, that I'm learning to listen in a different way, and I'm learning to loiter in a different way. In my life, I've gotten a lot better at moving around than I have at staying put. I've gotten a lot better at saying goodbye than at sticking through things. And being here is an exercise for me in practicing reverential relationship with a continued group of people, and it's just starting. We've just been together a few months. There's so much possibility. In my work in the learning ministries of this place, I'm learning and I'm practicing how to listen. And I invite you to do the same. Let's get lost and then get found together. May it be so.